Our modern world has been obsessed with the idea of trilogies, a set of three of a body of work or art. A set of two is seen as too small, not enough, and leaves us wanting more. It's almost like an unfinished product. And a set of four is seen as too much, dragged on, and the magic is taken out of it. A set of three, a trilogy, really is the Goldilocks number. It feels complete, and is just right. Now, with that being said, it doesn't mean a trilogy is always good. Sometimes the last one of the set, or the second one, end up being a huge letdown, and ruin the mystique of the trilogy. But when all three are great, when all three work in tandem, what we get is an amazing feat, rarely touched upon, putting it into legendary status. Some of the best trilogies, or threes if you will, are Jordan's and the Bulls' second three-peat, Bryan Cranston's 3 Emmy wins in a row for playing Walter White, the 3 seasons of Fruits Basket, the incredible Batman Arkham series, Newton's 3 Laws of Motion, Super Saiyans 1, 2, and 3, this Crystal Castle's 3-album run, LeBron winning 3 in a row to come back from down 3-1 to win the championship, cementing himself as the GOAT. The Third Reich, these three teaming up in World War II. And of course, how can we forget the Star Wars trilogy? The sequel trilogy, of course.
We've decoded the intel from the First Order spy, and it confirms the worst. Somehow Palpatine returned.
But out of all these trilogies, the one that stands out the most to me is the reboot Planet of the Apes trilogy. It's my favorite trilogy, and in my opinion, the best movie trilogy. And I know the overwhelming majority of you would disagree, since a lot of you see the Lord of the Rings trilogy as the definitive trilogy of all trilogies. The one trilogy to rule them all. And as much as I love and adore the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I think the Planet of the Apes trilogy is just a little better in meaningful ways. And that's what I want to talk about. Why the Planet of the Apes trilogy is my favorite, and what makes it so great. It all started in 2011, when Rise of the Planet of the Apes came out. I was 10 years old, and I had heard the Planet of the Apes series. Obviously a fairly popular series. I went to go see it in theaters with my uncle and my 2 cousins. And I remember everything about that day. I remember we sat in the front, and I also remember after the movie, we went to go eat at a spot called Tilted Kilt. It's basically another Hooters. But anyways, I love the movie. I thought it was really fun, and I will always remember the scene where Caesar speaks and tells Draco Malfoy, the closest comparison I can make to this scene, in terms of craziness, out of nowhere, jaw dropped, the whole audience in the theater gives a collective shout, is when Captain America picks up Thor's hammer in Endgame. If you didn't see Rise in theaters back then, but saw Endgame in theaters, whatever we felt in that moment is what we all felt back in 2011, when Caesar first spoke. I've seen the movie about 4 times now, and watching it again, going through the whole trilogy recently, this movie gets better after every viewing. It's a very good movie. You can even argue a great movie. But where the movie really makes its impression on you is its heart. The emotional performance, and really the emotional undertones, really make the whole movie. It's what makes the movie great. The whole selling point of the movie is that you have to feel emotionally connected, invested in Caesar, an ape. He's the main character. We're following his journey from birth, literally. And the movie went far and beyond on this point. The performances by James Franco, and especially Andy Serkis, are phenomenal. You're sold on this father-son relationship, and you feel the emotional toll when they're separated, when the relationship seems to diminish. The motion capture technology, watching the movie in 2024 just shows how advanced the CGI was in 2011. The facial expressions, everything, it just makes you appreciate the movie even more. It's pretty much flawless for its time. It doesn't look weird or feel out of place. This movie, and the whole trilogy really, is one of the few examples, nowadays, of CGI being art. People actually took their time. They weren't rushed, and they took their time to create photorealistic images. Not only for the visual quality, but the overall quality of the movie, of the series. The CGI wasn't used to cut costs. It was made to give the audience an emotional human connection, reaction to the characters. Something that I hope movie companies like Marvel go back to. But anyways, James Franco and Andy Serkis both deserved Oscar considerations for this scene. The fact that they didn't straight up laugh is insane. The ending of this movie to me is one of the best endings ever. Or at least of the past 2 decades. It's very subtle but very powerful. It's the last time Caesar and James Franco will see each other. And instead of this being a sad, somber moment between father and son, the tone of this scene is one that makes you feel like everything is as it should be. We shouldn't be sad, we should be okay with what's happening. As James Franco's character comes to this understanding when Caesar brings him in close and tells him he's home.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
And as Caesar goes to his fellow apes, James Franco gives him a nod as they give a last look to each other. Caesar climbs to the top of the tree and sees San Francisco across the skyline, which is a perfect last shot, which will come to represent the coming conflict in the next movie, but overall in the next 2 movies. the divide between humanity and apes. The woodland forest nature, the home of the apes, versus the technological cityscape, home of the last, of humanity. But the ending overall encapsulates the movie, the destiny of Caesar, an ape raised by a human man, wondering where he belongs, and what home truly is to him, to leaving all that he knows, and finding his true home, and reaching that freedom. Freedom from the attic, the cage, the collar, and the one who raised him, his father figure, giving him that approval with a smile on his face. Perfect ending. I love it. Way too underrated. Rupert Wyatt, the director, doesn't get the credit he deserves for this movie. I mean, if this movie was handled slightly different, it could have gone very wrong, and he just nailed it. He understood the heart of this movie would be the emotional pull between Caesar and James Franco. And if you won't get credit for the whole movie, then he deserves credit for that ending. And then we get to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And this movie is what separates this trilogy from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. My personal hype for this movie was an all-time high. Coming off the awesomeness that was Rise, when the trailer for this movie came out, it had me hooked like no trailer before. And the movie delivered. It's one of the best sequels of all time. The acting, the motion capture CGI, the conflict, shots like this. It blew me away. Matt Reeves cooked when making this movie. And the third one, obviously. Fun fact, I actually got to see Matt Reeves in person. It was at my sister's graduation at USC for film school. And my amazement when I saw the director of my favorite trilogy and Batman, I was more excited about seeing him than seeing my own sister graduate.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you, Dean Daly, distinguished faculty, and congratulations, Prentice, on your Mary Pickford Award. Here, excuse me as I put this down. To all the parents and friends, I say welcome. And to the class of 2022.
But Matt Reeves, just like Rupert Wyatt, understood at the setting point of this movie, of this series, of this franchise, of this trilogy, wasn't going to be how pretty the movie looks, the action set pieces. It was going to be the humanity and emotional conflict between the characters. And this is where this trilogy is better in my eyes than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The character writing in this movie alone is just beyond anything that was in Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings obviously wasn't devoid of great character writing. Aragorn's journey throughout the three movies is something to behold. And I also really love Faramir's character, and actually think that his character and everything that has to do with them was the best part of Two Towers. But for as much as I love Lord of the Rings, that's all the trilogy really has to offer when it comes to good character writing. And I watched the extended versions, which is like an extra 30 minutes each. I mean, in this movie, Koba as a villain, his story alone is beyond anything in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The dynamic between Koba and Caesar is one of the best we've seen in movies. And really the dynamics between the four main characters, Caesar, Koba, Malcolm, Dreyfus. Caesar and Malcolm are parallel to each other. One ape, one man. But both want apes and humans to live in peace and harmony. But they're both foiled by their own respective counterparts, Koba and Dreyfus, who are parallel to each other, both being very gung-ho, war-hawkish, seeking to destroy the other species. So now actually talking about it, this movie alone has some of the best character writing ever in a movie. The villain, you clearly understand where he's coming from, his hate for humans. Malcolm, who lost his wife and doesn't want his son to see any more horrific things. Dreyfus, having lost his family and being the leader of the humans in San Francisco. And of course Caesar, and his character growth from a naive, wishful leader to an eventual war leader. And this movie really has it all. It's a masterpiece, one of the greatest movies ever made. And it's followed up by another masterpiece, another all-time great movie, War for the Planet of the Apes, the culmination of one of the all-time great trilogies. And just like my hype for Dawn was at all-time high, my hype for War was even higher. One of the reasons why this trilogy is great is that not only do all the movies obviously follow a singular storyline revolving around Caesar, the main character, but what makes the trilogy special is that each movie revolves around a certain theme or themes. In Rise, you have the theme of freedom and finding where you belong. In Dawn, it's you can't have peace without war. And in War for the Planet of the Apes, it flips that theme on its head, and you can't have peace without war, then becomes war is bad. I know, crazy, right? But War for the Planet of the Apes is an anti-war movie. Whereas War in Dawn is seen as this final confrontation, this final ordeal between remaining humans and the apes. Whoever gets to win will survive. While in War is shown as a destructive force, presented through the battles between the apes and the fanatical military force, Alpha Omega. The first scene of the movie is a battle showing dozens dying on both sides. I mean, the final one-third of the movie is a battle between the final bastions of humanity. To convey that war is pointless, this war between man and ape led to humanity going to war with each other, ultimately leading to the destruction of organized humanity. And the Colonel, played brilliantly by Woody Harrelson, is low-key an underrated villain. One of the best scenes in the movie is when the Colonel is explaining to Caesar why he is the way he is, that he isn't actually ruthless as he appears to be to Caesar's eyes, but he's actually merciful. he explains to Caesar that he had to kill his own son and many among his own camp after contracting a new virus that stops humans from speaking, which will eventually dumb them down. The colonel adds that this will eventually rob humans of their humanity. Everything that makes a human human, their ability to speak, their higher learning potential, will be taken from them. And that's a very powerful view, especially when you realize he killed his own son for this reason. He saw his son in the colonel's view, a non-human state. And you have to imagine what the colonel felt in that moment. And I love Woody Harrelson's performance in this scene. There's a bit of that cold, calculated, ruthless leader, and also a touch of sadness. He didn't want to see his son in that state, and the only way out was to take his life. I also like the parallel between Caesar and the colonel. Both are going out of their way to see the destruction of the other by any means. Caesar leaves his people to venture out and hunt down the colonel, while the colonel wants to eradicate any evidence of ape kind. And it both leads to their downfall. For Caesar, his apes, his people get captured and put in a work camp, and many die, while with the colonel it causes his military force to be completely wiped out. And through all that war, misery, death, and destruction, this movie had a very beautiful ending. Caesar finally leads his apes to the promised land. They now have the ability to live freely. Caesar dies with a smile on his face. Literally the opposite of Thanos' ending in Infinity War, as Caesar comes to fulfill his dream in a bittersweet but beautiful ending. I remember seeing this in theaters, and it had me crying a little. I actually remember going to the theater with my little sister and my cousin, and I told them, hey, let's go see that new Planet of the Apes movie. It's gonna be awesome, you'll like it. And they flat out said no. A movie about apes sounds stupid, and it probably will be. They didn't know any better. They never saw the previous two. Instead, they want to go see the Emoji Movie. Yeah, I know, crazy, right? They traded going to see one of the greatest movies of all time with one of the worst movies of all time. Crazy. And they hated it too. They were telling me how incredibly awful the movie was. It was funny. But with all that said, the Planet of the Apes reboot trilogy is peak fiction. To me, it's just a tad bit better than Lord of the Rings trilogy. There's a couple things the Ape trilogy does better, but those things are far and away more meaningful. The Lord of the Rings is more grand. The scope of the story is way bigger. More locations, more characters, more moving parts. It's more epic in that sense. But to me, the character writing, starting from the beginning of Rise, all the way to the ending of War, edges out the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I love the Planet of the Apes trilogy. To me, it's not just an underrated trilogy that not many people watched or think about. It's more than that to me. It's the greatest trilogy of all time.